smoke and mirrors. It's a public statement, it's a press statement, and we're on to the next thing. And this is the challenge. You mentioned Wapu Sonk before in the question. Why is no one asking questions of that? We heard of an investigation being called. It didn't say who was investigating. No one mentioned it. From what I see from, in the media and from what I hear from the Australian media, what they have access to and provided, there's problem-facing material of a crime being committed. Doesn't mean they've committed it, but there's definitely enough to at least warrant a really significant investigation.
Welcome to Coffee with Lewa. Real talk, true stories, and PNG over coffee. This is a space for real conversations about the challenges, triumphs, and untold stories of Papua New Guinea. Over a cup of coffee, we speak the truth, we share insight, and explore different perspectives on issues that matter. Coffee with Lewa is where dialogue flows freely, voices are heard, and ideas are shared to spark understanding and change. So, grab your coffee because, as you know, it's going to be good. I'd like to move on now to economic mismanagement, financial crime, and public safety. Papua New Guinea has borrowed heavily from international institutions, including the IMF, World Bank, ADB, and DFAT since 2019, with total borrowings estimated at around 37 billion kina during the Marape Rosso government's tenure. Yet, visible development gains remain elusive. Instead, we see mounting examples of mismanagement and corruption. Just to name a few here, Air Niugini's new fleet cannot operate in 8 of the 14 regional airports it was meant to service, potentially necessitating another billion kina in expenditure. PNG Power is insolvent with debt exceeding 4 billion Australian dollars. There has been no formal investigation into Wapu Sonk's leadership of KPHL, despite serious concerns, and Connect PNG continues to prompt questions over cost, quality, and transparency of its road projects. How do you reconcile the official narrative of progress with these glaring failures, and what does this pattern reveal about governance and accountability in PNG?
Yeah, thanks, Lord. Look, that's a really important question. Probably I'll do my best to navigate away from the policy position around, borrowings and the economic policy of government and what that looks like, because I actually tend to agree that, you do need to invest. And I do think that, groups like the ADB, the World Bank and the IMF are absolutely critical. And I was aware of some work that was happening even with the World Bank, of which I had to more or less try and force my way into just by sheer luck of being at an anti-corruption conference where I bumped into someone from Justice and from the Prime Minister's Department and realised that they were negotiating funding of $240 million over 3 years. And there was going to be a governance and corruption aspect to that. And I sort of said, well, did you think about calling the ICAC? And to their credit, they really, were really keen to have me in the conversations with the World Bank, which I then tried to follow up. Well, I did follow up with the Chief Secretary, but again, I think there's very much a focus around, we just need to keep the revenue coming in PNG. And that's whether it be through borrowing, through taxation, we just got to look at, the ability of the government to even fund the departments, because your ability to fund departments also impacts upon the ability around those departments to have proper governance and implement it. Generally speaking, I would look at a figure of around about 4% of budget on any project or any government department should be geared to, at a minimum, should be geared towards ensuring that there's proper governance. And so you look at that across even the agencies that are supposed to ensure governance in PNG, and we look at the Auditor General's Office, you look at the ICAC, you look at the Ombudsman's Commission. What is it that we should pay those organisations to ensure that, tens of billions of kina is actually effectively delivering services? And so this is where you really, really see it. And we have a litany of these, complaints. I see them made to me personally, they were made to the ICAC, where you just see, there was money doled out for projects just not delivered, or delivered well under what they're supposed to be. You see, I'm not a builder. I've never done construction. A bit of work around the house every now and then, but that's it. You look at a school, which is supposedly a 3 million kina school. It's a portable building. It's like I could build, like a much fancier house than what is basically a portable building. And granted that there's some remoteness around where some of these installations are going, but where is it? Where is it gone, this money? Like, that's just obscene. 3 million for that. I quoted to around it's about 1 million Australian, because I still have to convert everything back to my Australian dollars to understand what return on investment and value often looks like in Papua New Guinea. And it's challenging because the Kina is obviously still falling at the moment. That's another side issue. But where is it? It's just procurement and governance and all these things are just completely lacking. Due diligence on who's going to be our contractors or our suppliers is just non-existent. I'm just beguiled that, the amount of politicians that have businesses, and those businesses, guess who they do business with? Government. It's an absolute no-no. It's even written in my legislation that I can't have another job. I can't, I've got to declare to the Ombudsman's Commission if I'm a director of other companies and other bits and pieces and other assets I have, but I can't go and trade in a business. And that's right, because I certainly can't do business with myself as the public constitutional officer. Can't go and give the private Dan Bolsh, government money or funding from his organisation to go and do something. I just laughed when I heard the example, and I shouldn't laugh, but it's one of frustration, and it was published in the media, and I saw it going around social media, the awarding of a contract, I think it was Two Good Constructions of 247 million Kina.
Yeah.
And with this, where I'm told, and, I put this with a grain of salt, and, I was showing IPA records, which I saw through social media, that shows that a minister is the sole owner of that company. And apparently that was okay because the NEC made the decision in his absence. It's like, well, you haven't deconflicted that choice, and look, that road may well happen. It may get delivered. We may get full 247 million value on it. And in fairness, I've done research in the company. They've delivered other projects in the past for government. So, that may happen, but it's not the way you do business. And the flip side as well too, and this is where some of the other corruption impacts happen. If you're out there and you're a struggling person in Papua New Guinea, you work in the construction industry, have done for years, and you're trying to make your way through and fight your way up off the poverty line and to start a business in construction, what hope do you have? What right and what fairness do you get to actually tender for these business and these contracts? I mean, where is this put out? Where is this advertised? How are you sought? What opportunity do you have? It seems pretty clear to me that unless you've got political connections, there's a fair chance you won't get the business. And that's the massive, massive impact on why we have so many businesses that just simply are not delivering when they're given government money. I read it even in the PPL stuff where it's alleged there's many bits of works that are waiting. I saw it in the ABC report where there's people have paid for power connection out in rural areas of Papua New Guinea, which is absolutely vital to a business, employing many Papua New Guineans, delivering food to people who need it. And they're waiting years later and they've paid the money. It's just, it's crazy. And quite often these will be providers that have been government approved, that they sign the contract with the parent agency. And this is what we also see with the structures around KCH and things like PPL, is that, the head body's making decisions about what the subordinate body should do. They're signing them to deals and contracts, paying their debts, and then saying, this is a debt to us, you need to pay us back. Special economic zones. I just think there's things like that we just need to have a proper look at and saying, well, who are we actually giving these tax breaks to and special conditions under which they trade? 100% I encourage investment in Papua New Guinea, and we desperately do need foreign investment, proper private foreign investment in PNG. How much that investment ends up going back offshore is the question. When there is well known, there's wealth held in Singapore, there's wealth held in Australia, and not business activity that generates further wealth. It's personal wealth held in, real estate, luxury vehicles, trust accounts. Why are we not looking into that? So it's just, there's serious reform that's required on all these things, to the point that it needs to almost be a hands-off. Well, it does need to be a hands-off approach from the political aspect, and these organisations should be administered independently. I really can't see where anything short of bringing in administrative bodies and consultancies internationally who have never done business in the country before won't be potentially the ultimate solution. A piece of work where someone, is actually empowered to put these into place. It brings us back to, again, well, if the states had a loss, and even as the ICAC a deputy commissioner are going to the government department or went to the head of state and said, well, the country's incurred a loss. We've found this money, which we believe is overseas, held by a person who's responsible for that corrupt loss. Why would you not vest that loss in a private entity that will launch a civil action on your behalf with metrics of, you know what, you're going to go recover that money. While all of it might not come back and it's going to cost because, legal processes do cost. We're going to bring something back for the people of PNG. Imagine what that could be. I mean, I don't know what a school costs, but it's probably in the millions of kina. How many schools would we build? How much medicine would we put into
hospitals, all the necessities that we don't have right now, basic necessities is at that, and it's not that the people or we are asking for much. We are asking for the very basic necessities that is a human right. Access to hospitals, access to schools. Look at our HDI right now. These are basic necessities, basic services that our people clearly are not getting. And at what point, when does it shift that we can finally see these services? And you raised a good point. I just wanted to touch on that. Building a school that's portable and saying it's 3 million kina. Do our people deserve rubbish? Exactly. That has always been my question. If we're going to do a school, do it properly. Let it be state of the art. If we're going to build a hospital, let it be state of the art. Let it be what other countries have. With the resources that we have, with all that God has blessed us with, we have absolutely no excuse as to the quality of these buildings, the quality of our services. I agree with you entirely. You can't say you spent 3 million kina and you see a matchbox. It doesn't equate. And the children are still sitting on the floor and the teacher's by him or herself and hasn't been paid. That's not a service.
Spot on, Laura. And that's exactly what I was about to raise with you, because on top of that school building, who's in it teaching? How are they getting paid? Where's the money going? Even in terms of claiming funding from the government, are we reporting the right amount of students that are in that school? Things like the DDA funding. It's like, why does that exist? Were the mechanisms of government not fit beforehand? I think it's for financial efficiency and for governance. What happens in most other places like Australia, you take something like education, it's centralised. It's centralised at a Commonwealth level, and then it's centralised at a state level as well too. And so the funding is all done in a transparent way as best as possible to both public and private schools. And you can see the numbers and see where the investment goes, and you measure the outcomes and the results. And we don't see any of that stuff, but you're absolutely spot on. When you talk about the fact, well, what's going into that school? Is it just a building? Is there even a blackboard in there? Let alone things like computers and modern technology. Why are we aiming for things for people in Papua New Guinea that is probably tech from and a way of learning from 30, 40 years ago? Shouldn't we be striving for the rest of the world in terms of what, the developed world really looks like, and educating our people in that way? It's absolutely critical. And one of the saddest things that ever happened to me at the ICAC was, unfortunately in my time, one of our lead investigators passed away. He suffered and got a medical condition that in most other parts of the world, given the right medical treatment, he would have survived from. He was unwell and off work for a period of time and then passed away about 3 or 4 weeks later. The most disheartening thing even then, when I was asked to pay for, and not understanding the cultural difference, and this is a failing of mine, that the ICAC was going to pay all the expenses associated with the funeral. And basically, I was asked to approve some costs along with Graham pretty quick for this person to say, yep, we're going to arrange the transition of the body. The lack of respect, that is caused by the way in which even a morgue and facilities are maintained in PNG just makes me feel ill. And been around death and terrible things for a long time in my professional career, but it is so sad that someone who had such value to their family, and I went to the house cry, met with the family. Andrew was a beautiful man and a very, very good investigator and good at his job. And it was sad for me that he wasn't going to be on the fight with us against corruption anymore. But it is tough. Those basic, simple things of life that, I would take for granted and still do, and even had a good life when I was in Papua New Guinea. It's terrible for people, and we wonder why it's so easy to impress people, because you give them nothing and they're too afraid to have a voice.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And the other question I wanted to prompt was, why isn't our government interested in bringing back the illegal gotten gains that is offshore? Why is that not of interest?
Don't know, to be honest. I mean, I can't. I mean, look, I can say that there are those with vested interests. It's quite clear where who has some of the money and holds it internationally. I won't name names, obviously, because, I will find myself in court in one of those civil suits probably pretty quick, and potentially here in Australia, which can be, even more costly than PNG. But that's also a technique and a weapon they use that's, designed to create fear and threat against you. To be frank, the technical experience just isn't even there. We've seen it through the Mutual Valuation Review and now the FATF grey listing, which apparently there's been existing some hope that we would avoid the grey list. I think I said that in about August 2023 when I first became involved, about a month and a half after I'd arrived in the mutual valuation process, where I sat in a room and we couldn't even tell people from the FATF, the review team, that we'd charged people with money laundering offences, had any assets even domestically under restraint or seizure, and were prosecuting people with a view to taking their stuff off them. I go, we're in trouble. And I said, even then, we're going on the grey list. There is no way that within the review period of time that we'll be able to do the things that are required to be done. It took us 2 years or over 2 years back in, I think, between 2013 to 2016, getting off the grey list last time. I saw in Parliament the other day the Prime Minister stand up, and he talked about how we're going to, potentially try and avoid the grey list or at least lessen the impact. That's not going to happen. He mentioned some critical things that he believes, or he stated to the Parliament, that are actually happening. And this is in response to a question from the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. He talked about the Proceeds of Crime Act. So the Proceeds of Crime Act has been in a state of flux for a great period of time. It was absolutely one of the first things I inquired about when I first arrived in the country, because it's one of the things that was actually sold to me in coming to the job. We've got this Proceeds of Crime Act. We've got legislation that'll help you recover unexplained wealth. I thought, brilliant. From my experience of organised crime and looking at financial crime, it is one of the most powerful things, as opposed to sending people to jail, is taking the profits off them. It absolutely dissuades them from doing it any further because it's a wasted investment. Even taxing their corrupt profits is also another way, because you take their profits off them and then you tax them for them anyway, and they've got a tax bill which they can't pay. And it's one of the most effective ways of enforcing against the corrupt and the criminal. So I get to PNG, I can't even get a copy of the POCA on the Proceeds of Crime Act. And when I eventually do, no one can even tell me which version of POCA is actually in force. And I read through the act that I'm given, and it's absolutely awful. It didn't incorporate the ICAC properly. It wasn't even clear in terms of how the police operate. And the police had no mechanisms in place to actually do any of this stuff. And so what you end up having is sometimes you will have police actually see stuff, but they're usually just stealing it, or they're taking something without a lawful authority or power to do so, let alone, get involved in a really tough battle in court to take those assets. Because there are a lot of risks in doing this, especially when you do it through the legislation as it stands, or through any legislation, even in Australia, because you'll get challenges. So you'll get people who are related to the persons who you're targeting will be coming forward and saying, no, I've got an interest in that. That's actually mine. And you need the skill and ability and the law to actually be able to support you and show, no, it's not theirs. They're just trying to keep what they've stolen. And it's got to be aggressive. The unexplained wealth provisions simply do not work. There was a part put in the Act which talks about the ICAC being able to use unexplained wealth, doesn't talk about the police. In the rest of the Act, it doesn't talk about the ICAC at all. So there's no enabling provisions under which the ICAC could have made that work. It's an absolute misnomer. It does not exist. There is no unexplained wealth that's currently been able to be enforced in PNG. The whistleblower legislation. Whistleblower legislation and a policy is extremely hard to make work, even in an Australian context. The whistleblower legislation, extremely short. It talks about, I think, mostly around people not being able to lose their job. But how on earth is that? If you're employed at a public service and you're down the food chain and you find corruption and you speak out and you become that whistleblower, you get sacked, how soon do you reckon it would take for you to get your job back? How soon do you reckon it would take before another government agency actually took up the fight on your behalf and supported you for coming forward and took action against the corrupt person that you'd made those allegations against? It's just not realistic. As I say in all these things, you've got to have a system in place. And I did this for many, many years, protecting whistleblowers, protecting confidential informers or human sources. It takes a lot. If we had someone come forward and say to us tomorrow, I've got the evidence that will tip out a whole lot of corrupt people. It'll help us locate billions and billions of kina overseas. And it really was the case that evidence was strong enough and that would help us do it. What would we offer for them? Would it be unreasonable to say to someone like that, you know what, we're actually going to do everything we can to try and get you citizenship in another country. If you give evidence and help us convict these people, help us recover the money, we'll do that. We'll support you. We'll even give you, not a percentage, but enough that, if you need to live the rest of your life, not live like a rich man, but at least live sufficiently enough for you and your family and protect you. Wouldn't we pay that? What's the appetite, in PNG for that type of, proposal or scheme? Probably zero, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's even a thought. It's non-existent at that.
It's smoke and
Non-existent
mirrors.
and not even thought of.
Smoke and mirrors. It's a public statement. It's a press statement, and we're on to the next thing. And this is the challenge. You mentioned Wapu Sonk before in the question. Why is no one asking questions of that? We heard of an investigation being called. It didn't say who was investigating. No one mentioned it. From what I see from, in the media and from what I hear from the Australian media, what they have access to and provided, there's problem facing material of a crime being committed. It doesn't mean they've committed it, but there's definitely enough to at least warrant a really significant investigation. And instead, we leave people in place in positions. We let them do media releases about, look at me, I'm over here doing this. I'm supporting this program. I've got this initiative coming. We do openings for roads. The road doesn't even exist yet. So we say, well, we've estimated this funding, and it gets sold as a great success because we've say we'll put 200 million to build this road. This vital connection is so important. They get pitched in a way as if the road's already built, and it's not. It's a dirt track. That's an absolute falsehood.
Yeah, I actually was going to touch on that. I wanted to talk about, actually, I should clarify the question with you. They did come out in the media and say that they were going to do a internal investigation. So KPHL was performing this internal investigation. Is that diligence? Is that good process? Is that what happens normally? Just so our audience can understand, can you internally investigate yourself?
Most definitely you can. The question is, what are you going to do with it as well too? I actually think there very much is a responsibility of the board to be asking some really hard questions. KCH should be asking some really hard questions. The minister should be asking some really hard questions. The prime minister should be asking some really hard questions. What you don't do is mark your own homework as well too. And so having the managing director, if the allegations are central to him, and I believe they are from what I saw, why is he still there? I mean, what's the ability to influence that investigation and determine the scope, the size, how it's actually done, and follow up on it? And look, I certainly won't criticise internal investigations because internal investigations is something I did in Victoria for Victoria Police. But what I did is I held people accountable. And I've done it in many, many leadership and management roles where, I've given people punitive outcomes. I've also cleared them from many, allegations as well too, because I did it fairly and transparently. If it ends up they get the sack, or in the extreme examples, what I talked about Victoria Police, they go to jail, I'm not the decision maker on that. But the difference is you can't have an internal investigation where everything just happens inside. There's no transparency on what was actually done and what was asked. And then, you just come out months later and say it was all good, or you don't come out at all. And this is what comes back to when I talked about at the start of this around legitimacy. There is absolutely no legitimacy when you do an internal investigation and you do nothing with it. What's taking them so long? It doesn't seem really complex and hard to me. Why has there not been at least action to at least ensure that a fair and transparent investigation has taken place? It may be internal, secure the evidence, prevent any damage to the evidence, which means you don't leave people who are suspected of doing the wrong thing with access to all the information, leave them there. And this is even going back to the issue of when we had with Andrew. It's like, it was absolutely an absurdity that we had people, who had investigated him, had uncovered evidence against him, were having to go into the workplace where he would walk past them every day and also, do acts of, as reported to me, of intimidation. To make a complaint against someone around the fact that, or getting to try and source allegations that we had a digital forensics officer who was working allegedly for another international anti-corruption body, completely unfounded, is absolutely detrimental conduct because you're trying to cause fear and get them sacked. It's ridiculous. It's not the way, and it's not the culture we should be looking for in any of our organisations in PNG, let alone government agencies and state-owned enterprises that are so critical to the country.
Right. Absolutely. I'd like to circle back to the FATF grey listing because that is a hot topic at the moment. Papua New Guinea, as we are all aware, is on the verge of being grey listed by the FATF. This is not the first time, as you said, PNG has faced such scrutiny. Back in 2014, the government responded by passing 5 pieces of legislation, which ultimately led to the country's removal from the grey list in 2016. Yet, those laws were never properly implemented, and nearly a decade on, PNG is back in the same position. This time, however, FATF and international partners are demanding tangible results, such as actual asset forfeitures and successful prosecutions, not just reforms on paper, as we've heard many times. Why do you think there has been little to no implementation of the laws passed in 2014?
I think really it's hard because, I mean, you've got to look at what's the outcome we actually wanted. And this is something I would see a lot. And this isn't necessarily, I'm not alleging some great conspiracy or anything like that. But I think what also happens is that we don't define the outcome we want, or we define the outcome is of, we just need to deliver 5 pieces of legislation. And that's not an outcome, that's an output. We don't have the genuine will or the want to say, well, no, we actually want to stop the money laundering. We want to stop terrorism financing, because that's the mindset you actually do need. The challenge that also exists is that the FATF requirements evolve. So the FATF, APG and all the other associated entities with the FATF meet regularly. They assess the value of the current conditions and the current conditions under which they expect countries to operate and what things and mechanisms and controls they expect the country to have in place. Simply assuming that we were off it in 2013, from the 2013 review, therefore we've got all those things that still existed in 2013, is just naive. It's not everyone. There are definitely people at FASU who did a lot of coordination in the process, who have a really good understanding of what's required and actually met their requirements within their unit themselves. The problem is that the rest of the system is not going on the journey. Understanding that we needed to show performance outcomes, those performance outcomes are really, really tough. I mean, you've got to look at anywhere in the world doing any sort of, corruption or financial crime matter. These things take years, if not decades. So to walk into the review period thinking that, worst case scenario, we'll just fall across the line during the review period and won't be grey listed based on the fact that we haven't actually been able to do any of this stuff in the last 10 years is just simply naive. And I think this is the challenging piece because, being grey listed has some significant consequences for the country in terms of, growth, revenue, as well as confidence in terms of people actually investing into PNG. For the banks, they've got to work really, really hard with their correspondent banks internationally in potentially avoiding having those banks de-risk and break those relationships, which then causes even greater liquidity challenges in terms of not just for the banks, but for the people, because it's the people who need the money. They need the investment. They need, the cash flow to keep coming through, especially in an economy in PNG where it is heavily cash-based still, but conversely, that also makes it really hard to track and trace when it comes to money laundering. So what can often happen, and I'm not saying that the FATF do or will bend on the recommendations and the requirements of what they make, but they just will start to then look at, well, can we accept the token effort of what was made here? And do we just consider that enough? So say if the RPNGC actually do go out and, I think they're hurriedly doing at the moment, trying to look at age matters where they didn't restrain assets and trace down the money, they may accept that and say, oh, well, you've lodged the forms, you've started the process, you've restrained and seized something, we're on the way. But dealing with things such as money laundering, it's much, much deeper than that. You've really got to have the follow the money principles. And so, not to harp on one case, but I can talk about it because, he's been convicted. He's in prison trying to get out at the moment. The Paraka matter. It's just simple questions of no one's asked where the money is, and I think, there's been the former deputy secretary in the finance who's recently been convicted as well too. We're still not asking the money. I can't see anywhere through the material that's put before the court, as I understand it, that showed where the money actually went and actually showed even financial benefit to him. So for me, and I'll probably limit my comments to there because I don't believe he's been sentenced yet. So I don't want to, damage or harm what that outcome of the court looks like. But I keep coming back to this thing of, well, where's the money? We had tens of millions of Kina, which has supposedly been gone to that law firm for invoices, and this is not prejudicial in the court matters because this is the way the case was put, that the money went to this law firm into the trust account for bills which they gave to government for which there was no service delivered. So where's that? Paraka got it? Doesn't seem like it to me. And from everything I hear, where did it go? So clearly there's a distribution which has happened out of that trust or out of his accounts at Paraka Lawyers, which has gone somewhere. Have we looked at their books? Has it all just gone out as cash? Have we made any efforts to even look at where that cash even went? I'm still amazed that someone hasn't said to him, tell us where it went. What's the deal that you're going to make? So he might be out, even in the current climate, potentially he's looking at, getting out because of various relief he sought. He's lodged appeals and other bits and pieces as well too. And I won't talk too much in depth to that. But surely if you're seeking leniency in a matter, tell us where the money is. It's funny. We've got legislation in some of the states in Australia. It's called no body, no parole, which is basically if you're charged and convicted of a murder and they haven't been able to find the body, which happens here sometimes, you don't get parole unless they find the body. So what I'd say, no money, no parole. Tell us where it went. You don't have to return it all. In terms of, if it's gone out to other parties, then that's on the state. But you at least need to evidence and show, who did you give it to? If you kept it all, where did it go? What did you spend it on? So for me, stuff like that's critical.
It's very interesting and makes complete sense, right? Follow the money trail, follow and see where the money went. Makes complete sense with your explanation just now. Yeah, that makes
100%.
complete sense.
And I'll talk about it now, even in the international context, because this is where a lot of it really hits. So we're in the process, and I've established some really good, strong relationships with corruption bodies and the police in places like Singapore. Australia can be a bit more challenging for geopolitical reasons, but I won't delve into that. But just when we're starting to build that network of information sharing and to getting financial information, firstly in the informal sense, before we have to then go through a long, complicated process through respective nations' attorney generals to get it as evidentiary, that all gets washed away. I was establishing those contacts with private entities, law firms, even people from academia in terms of tracing assets in places like Australia. So this is the type of outside the box approach that's required, entirely lawful. But the moment you start hinting at something that might be successful, look what happened.
Yeah. That is a very good example. I wanted to circle back to what we discussed earlier. Do you see a pattern in Papua New Guinea where agencies, commissions, and laws are established to satisfy international pressure, but are later undermined, leaving them ineffective, while leaders still claim credit for setting them up in the first place?
Yeah, definitely. We saw it at ICAC. It's like, we've got the ICAC. Yeah, but again, the ICAC is just an output. It's not the outcome. Do you really want to stop corruption or not? Actions speak louder than words. Yes, they've got an ICAC, but again, there's a long history to how that came about. There's been various recommendations from international bodies, from people like the EU who are heavily involved, IMF, ADB, World Bank, all make these various recommendations around having agencies like the ICAC as well too. But the problem is what these become are benchmarks, which is very low-hanging fruit. So to achieve that benchmark, you get the funding, it comes through. But, ICAC is legislation, as I said, goes back 26 years or 27 years now when the first attempts were starting to be generally made around having an ICAC. It's not till 2014 the constitutional amendment actually happens. So, you can try and claim it for a political sense, but it's spanned across multiple prime ministers and governments that's taken us to get it as a point of having an ICAC. And I really question if it's through political will, or it's just about having something that you can then use to then say, oh, look, we're looking at this, we're targeting that, or I'll refer it to the ICAC. And the pressure's then on the ICAC. And there's a difference between saying, hey, ICAC, can you investigate this? I think this is corrupt, as opposed to, right, that's fantastic. Tell us everything you know. Give us the evidence that you've got. And if you don't have it, give us access to it. Support us in going out and getting it. Do you talk publicly? When something happens, it gets reported in, say, the Post-Courier? Do you come out strongly and say, this is terrible? If this is true, I am going to take genuine action. The actions are A, B, C, D. And then do you make those things happen? And this is the trick. You've got to actually, the people need to keep asking these questions.
Yeah.
Why is no one asking what happened to the deputy commissioners anymore?
Yeah.
It's for me, I can't believe that public message isn't going out there. What happened to them? What are you going to do, Prime Minister, for instance? Wapo Song. What's happening? That people are not saying that, you must convict him, because no, he's got rights. He absolutely does need a thorough and proper investigation, but deliver the thorough and proper investigation and be transparent about it. Stop
Yeah.
talking about reputations. We can't harm people's reputations. It's like if you actually ask people out there in PNG what they think of those particular people, I can give you the tip. It's not high. If they think anything I'm saying is defamatory, it's factual. They should hear what people out in, the different provinces of PNG actually think about some of these people. They don't have a good reputation. So stop saying you're here to protect it. If it's in the paper, sue the paper. Ask them what it's based upon. But this is the thing, have transparency in these things. If you really want to be cleared of something, what you actually do is you invite, as I said, I've been subject to investigations before myself. And the one thing I did is I always asked for independently and thoroughly investigate me. To the point I even had a matter where I actually knew the investigator that was assigned. And I actually said to them, I said, you cannot give it to that person. You'll put them in a horrible position of conflict of interest because there'll be allegations around the fact that they gave me a soft run in doing it. Give it to someone who will be more thorough. And I gave it to someone who I didn't know.
These are the things that need to be happening in our country right now. These are the things that we want to see, right? We want to see that check and balance. We want to see the actual due diligence that's happening at that level when investigating such high levels of corruption. We've never seen that in our country. And to have ICAC come into establishment was a ray of hope. It was a ray of sunshine. We could see beyond the horizon into a future where little to no corruption existed. Now it's pretty grim, the outlook that we have at the moment. To hear that, that's actually what should happen and is happening in the rest of the world, or, mainly countries that have this figured out, is, important for our audience to understand that what we're seeing is actually not right.
100%. And look, I to be really, really honest, I've got regrets that and it's a criticism that gets leveled at me quite often. It's like, well, why weren't you speaking like this, ages ago? And so, I've tried. I tried to do it through the PNG system, the PNG way. And when I say that, I mean trying to do it, methodically, getting warrants from the courts and things like that as well too. But you just hit hurdles and delays. And I completely regret not speaking out sooner on some of these things, because there's this misnomer around protecting the information. It's like, well, as I said before, the country leaks. And what's happened is the groundswell of people that have come out and said, yeah, that's actually right. You're actually speaking a language of truth. And again, it's legitimacy, because people know it. If you stand there and tell them, oh, no, this is fine, there's nothing to see here, just move on, no one believes that. Nobody's believing that in Papua New Guinea at the moment. Well, it's just an absolute myth.
Thank you for being with us. You're watching Coffee with Loa. If you find this conversation meaningful, please like the video, subscribe to our channel, and share the link with your family and friends to join this vital conversation too. What do you think the impact of grey listing will be on PNG's economy, financial system, and the international standing if the country fails to demonstrate meaningful change? I mean, we've heard the governor of the Bank of Papua New Guinea say 99% sure we are going to be placed on this list. So what do you think the actual impact will be on our people?
I'm 100% sure we're going to be on the list. I hold back a 1%. Look, I could talk at it, I suppose, at a system level, and you look at, there's not a huge amount of research, because I actually looked at this some time ago as we were going into the review period. We're going, what does this actually mean? And at that high level, it's significant. There's drops in GDP, drops in investment confidence, or all these sorts of things that can happen. I think, though, at heading down through, the various levels around the average working Papua New Guinean, as well as on with the unemployed Papua New Guinean, it's quite significant, because the availability of even cash, or the value of what your kina actually buys you, can be quite damaging. So if the cost of imports go up as a result, if the cost of even production goes up, because, your 3 kina is now worth 2 kina, you get less for your money. It's just as simple as that. It becomes a real struggle. The ability, to bring in actual investment results in employment opportunities becomes, less as well too. Government, the revenue which government will then draw, of which the government budget, which obviously doesn't get paid out, in full quite often on time, that's just going to drop even further. I mean, it's just going to get harder and harder and harder. It'll start. I can see it becoming part of the conditions of the next level of funding. And I've got no insight into this being the actual case, but people like the UN giving programs of support, people like the IMF, the ADB, and the World Bank, all of a sudden they're going to start asking, well, we need you to get off this. We can't have a list. Before we give you more funding, we need to start seeing some results. And that's the challenging piece, is at what point do we actually start aligning some of those metrics of those partners, those funding partners, to actually make true performance? Don't just say, oh, we delivered a thing, we put a policy in. If you're giving people or giving the country, tens of millions of kina on the basis of passing just legislation or passing policies, that's crazy. You've actually got to pay on results. And the result should be that we got schools, we got health, we got education. That stuff's critical. We got roads, we got infrastructure, we got investment. At some point in time, you've got to show a profit. And that's especially in things you look at state-owned enterprises. I mean, they all get sold to us around things that we're going to maximise resources that come out of the ground. We're going to maximise gas projects, liquid gas projects. We're going to maximise gold, even the gold refinery bill, and some of the reporting I've seen around that. People should actually need to stop and read some of these things and go, to me, those numbers just don't add up in the way they're proposing this to happen. Why was there proposals to fund further purchase of gold in the subsequent years after the refinery is built? So the refinery costs hundreds of millions, but then the funding to purchase gold is in the billions. It's like, well, shouldn't we be turning a profit on the gold we buy, and that should then fund itself? These are supposed to be run as businesses where the beneficial owner is the people of PNG. Where is it? Where is the benefit? If there's benefit that's come out of places like PPL, KPHL, and other entities under KCHL, or even things like MRDC, where's the money? Just tell us. Just report it. I mean, it's a common thing. All public entities and private entities in Australia, or public listed entities, they produce financial statements that their boards and shareholders demand it. We don't see any of that. I mean, if you Google that stuff today, what's the chance you can find a financial statement for KCH anywhere today?
Yeah, that's my answer. Very sad. It's a very sad truth. You wouldn't be able to find that, not publicly. Or if it was, it might be outdated or not the accurate financial statement of the position that they're actually in.
That's right. A proper audited statement independently. Where's the fear? I mean, if you were to publish the transactions, I cannot remember the name of it at the moment, but I'm told there's it's called the Sovereign Wealth Fund in Australia, similar things where it's like the PNG Business Trust. So all the wealth is for the future of the country through the SOEs, from what I'm told, and I can't validate this is true, all goes into this one, a lot of it is supposed to go into this trust account in which there's supposed to be billions of kina. Where's that? Just show us the statements on that. Straight away, little things like that just give people the utmost confidence that, okay, we were wrong. Tell us we're wrong. Don't just come out and make a media statement. Give us the evidence that shows us to the point that that's actually right.
In recent years, the Highlands has seen shocking outbreaks of violence, including the February 2024 massacre in Wapanamanda, Enga Province, where at least 49 people were killed using military-grade weapons, and ongoing tribal clashes in 2023 that reportedly claimed over 150 lives. These crises are not only fueled by long-standing tribal tensions, but also by the proliferation of high-powered rifles, such as M16s, AR-15s, raising serious questions about who is funding these arms purchases and how such weapons are entering the country. I'd like to ask you, from ICAC's perspective, how does corruption and weak governance enable this flow of weapons?
So I'll talk probably from, and this is my general sense of law enforcement, organised crime, corruption as well too. So I'm loath to give an ICAC perspective because I don't want to fall foul of releasing information or talk about things that I shouldn't have. But it's pretty obvious, and it's actually something I've looked in a policing sense around how, firearms are imported from countries that manufacture them. And I'm not talking about the homemade firearms. They're common in Australia and they're also common in Papua New Guinea as well too. I'm talking about high-powered small arms like automatic rifles, handguns and things of that nature, shotguns as well too. There's only certain places in the world that manufacture those weapons. So Europe does it, parts of Asia, and obviously the USA is a pretty big arms manufacturer as well too. They've got to get into the country somehow. And so that's either by air, sea or land, or if they end up in the wrong hands, they're taken from people who are lawfully entitled to possess them. So people like the police and the military, even at the ICAC, we were in the process of trying to arrange that we had firearms for our people for obviously self-defense, because that's obviously a threat to them as well, to their safety at times. That costs, so generally speaking, legitimate firearms are expensive enough in Papua New Guinea because there's a fair old markup, because they usually come through wholesalers in other parts of the world, Australia, Asia as well too, not necessarily direct from the US. And I actually know this because the fact that when trying to source a better financial deal in terms of potentially purchasing firearms for the ICAC, we refer to agents in other parts of the world, in Australia in this case. I won't mention who the supplier is. So there's a fair markup that costs, and that takes money. You just got to look at, where PNG is at as an economy and what the biggest businesses are in town. And government really is the biggest business. When it's an annual budget of 28 billion, I think is roughly what it is this year, maybe 27. Where does that money go? Who would have enough money to actually purchase those firearms and deliver them to certain parts of the country? And so you mentioned the massacre in the Highlands. I was amazed at when that happened. Deeply saddened because it's horrible. The loss of, 49 lives is absolutely terrible. But then I hear things around the fact that they were mercenaries that were hired and brought in and all sorts of other things that go around. And none of this can be validated, I think, but it was published in some of the mainstream papers as well too. And it becomes really, really clear that there's clearly an interest beyond just, the old grudges between tribes or different provinces or different parts of the country that are being played out there as well too. It becomes clear also that, the Highlands is obviously a really critical part when it comes to having power in PNG. And I'm not talking about electricity, I'm talking about control, politics, all that type of thing as well too. There's clearly an interest in there as well too. But was anyone ever charged with murder or a terrorist attack out of that? I know peace was negotiated, and I absolutely understand it is an extremely challenging role for police and potentially also the military, but falls mostly in the police. And I actually do think it's a positive thing that perhaps it was the police commissioner that I think negotiated some sort of peace. But these pieces are fleeting, and that's because there's vested interests, it's power and control. If you've got control of what's essentially your electorate in the in the months to come, in the lead up to an election, there's a fair chance that you or the person you want to get in is getting voted in. I hear all these disturbing stories around, votes taken at the ballot box as well too. I'd seen parts of it, but it's some time ago, it was a 60 Minutes story, which was done around the 2022 election. And there was clear inferences. Well, there was clear indications that there's the real risk of threats of violence and payoffs in elections. So you don't have to be a genius to start forming, I suppose, a hypothesis or from an intelligence analytical perspective, that you're starting to make sorts of assumptions that your analysis leads to that point where there may well be a connection between the trafficking of firearms and public money.
And what role can the Commission play in exposing the networks behind both the violence and the failure of state institutions to protect citizens?
Well, I think for me, again, this is where it comes down to the money, because money is power, and that's what it's all about. It's absolutely fighting for a transparent system, returning the wealth to the actual fund, but then also, once you do the operational and investigative side of these matters or recover money, ensuring that there are proper governance procedures in place, that this doesn't happen again. The structures are absolutely right. And this is when and I keep going back to the money laundering type thing, but we look at even the current establishment of a trust account, which I believe maybe has finally been established, which was required under the Proceeds of Crime Act, where, returned assets or wealth goes held into this trust account. I can't understand why it took so long for this account to be established, but it apparently finally is. What the Act only allows is that money goes back into consolidated revenue, back into Treasury. So it's money for the government. So we get caught in this circular motion where we can recover corrupt money, but what's the source of most corrupt money? Public funds. So we're just putting it, I describe it as a bucket with a hole in it, but there really is just no bucket, because it feels like we might as well just throw the money on the ground sometimes, because that's what's happening with the level of wastage and corruption.
I like the analogy you gave. There's not even a bucket anymore. It's just running water, almost a waterfall.
Yep. 100%.
Streaming out to absolutely we don't know where.
Yep. No visibility over it whatsoever.
Circling back to whistleblowers and public reporting, how can citizens, public servants, or even businesses safely report corruption in PNG?
I'm a bit full. I want to say a positive thing. To be honest, I at this very point in time, I haven't got a lot of comfort around the fact that they can do it, to be really, really frank, on two levels. First of all, to have their voice actually heard and acted upon. And secondly, do they feel safe enough? Because, whether or not they actually are safe or at risk of physical violence it's not arbitrary, but it's how they feel. It's the sentiment of the people out in the PNG community. And do they feel confident enough that they can actually come forward? And they just don't. I would assure them, though, that there was efforts in place around, improving that and enhancing that at the ICAC as well too. But we were even subject to, I wouldn't quite call it threats and intimidation, but people would do things like, you'd have people follow you. We had one of our lead investigators, after a targeted investigation, sourced documents through a lawyer from the court, actually approached that investigator's family. And while no actual threats, verbatim were made, there's a definite implication in there, isn't there? When a person who you're investigating can come to your family where you live because someone, in their Wontok knows who you are or knows where you are or your family is, that's really hard, to deal with that sort of stuff and to tell people, how do we keep you safe? To that investigator's credit, we offered them all sorts of things like, hey, we'll put you up in a hotel for the time being. We'll find you an alternate apartment or housing where you can live with your family so you're safe. And he just said, look, keeps doing his job, but he just says, look, it's too much to bear for my family and I to have to move. We'll just stay and I suppose take our chances. But I think it's about building those avenues of support for whistleblowers that they actually A, see an outcome, and B, that you do everything you possibly can to feel safe. There are provisions in the ICAC Act or the OLICAC which allows a request to be made to the police commissioner for the safety of a witness. I just don't know, or a whistleblower, I just don't know how safe that protection from the police would make a lot of our whistleblowers feel, to be honest.
Okay, so what protections do they actually have under the current law, and what kind of evidence or public input helps trigger formal action, do you think?
Yeah, so for me, I think the more people can give us in terms of actual documentary evidence, and this is hard for people because they will feel all sorts of restrictions around, potentially law and company policies or government policies around not sharing information, not providing information. But you've got to counterbalance that with a duty under the OLICAC to actually report corruption. In my mind, and I believe it would be supported, that extends to providing the relevant material and evidence around it, or enabling bodies like the ICAC to exercise their powers to then know exactly where they need to go to obtain that evidence as well too. That's challenging in itself. Even this week, I saw reports around the outcome of a human rights application for a matter, which I won't go into detail around it, but, the ICAC's getting forced to pay damages in a situation which personally I think is absolutely preposterous, and just further emboldens those that, you can lean on the legal system in all the wrong ways to try and argue your way out of something. And what I'd say on that decision, well, even if the damages are payable and rightfully paid, that's not a proclamation of your innocence or that investigation is over. And this comes back to that resolve that you can run, you can lie, you can do all these things, you can even hide. But eventually, your anti-corruption bodies need to be ones that will catch you in the end.
Well said. Absolutely hope that for our country. Because as Papua New Guinea marks 50 years of independence, what would a credible national anti-corruption agenda require in the next 5 years? And what message do you want to leave with young Papua New Guineans about personal integrity, leadership, and courage?
I'll do the last bit first and the first bit last.
Yeah, I think we need a bit of hope after.
Yeah.
Let's
pump it up a little
bit. You know
bit.
what, Dan? The grim is the actual situation that we're in right now. I think, sometimes we need to hear the things that we don't want to hear. We need to actually talk about the things that are going wrong. I think we can't brush over them anymore. It's important that we hear the things that we don't want to hear so that we can change them.
And I think I'm quoting a movie. It might be a Batman movie. They say, well, the darkest hour is always just before the dawn. And I like to hope that's where we're actually at. And I'll be really, really honest, sort of playing myself down a little bit here. Thoroughly appreciate all the support and all the calls that are coming from people out there to, bring me back and have me fighting this and let let me run the fight on corruption. It's not going to be my voice that probably changes this. It's going to be yours. It's going to be everyone out there, the next generation, that completely take that sense of apathy, that sense of frustration and anger around what they feel, and turn it into, well, what do I do? You know? And the saying one vote, one voice is absolutely critical, because you need to be demanding the things that you want, law-wise, policy-wise, as well as, voicing really, really strongly that you will not tolerate corruption from those in politics as well as those in public service. And that's critical, is they have their voice. Like there are some amazing people out there in Papua New Guinea, and I've worked in mentoring roles. I've put people who were working for us at the ICAC, unfortunately they're gone, but were in mentoring roles through various programs, such through the Kokoda Track Foundation. Brilliant people we've got coming through, people in that sort of, late teens, early 20s. There's a lot of hope. People like yourself, Loa, who have made that transition out of that sort of mainstream and somewhat more restrictive media into the way in which you now communicate to the people. And it's just fabulous. There is that hope there, but you can't just hope. You've got to do. And for me, that's absolutely critical for all the people out there, is to start the doing. Speak publicly, demand accountability. I'm not asking anyone to have themselves end up in the local police cells, because I don't think that helps. So you've got to do it with evidence base and be really, really clear on what you want. And it's unifying. It's unifying in your collective, in your groups. I'm not saying start other political parties. I think we've already got enough of those, but it's having collectives for action. It's working with, not as a tribe, not as a province, not as a Wontok, working as a country, as one people. And I get it. That's tough. That's challenging, because, your first priority is always towards you, your family, your Wontok. But make the country what you want it to be. It's been a wasted 50 years from what I can see, and from all the feedback I get from everyone else, especially in Papua New Guinea. Even the last 20 for most, I talk about even Moresby, it just felt like a downward spiral. Take ownership of that, people. Use your voice and fight for the Papua New Guinea that you want it to be. And I don't mean fight in a violent sense. I mean use your voice, use your message, and amplify the messages of those that you trust and know that you can listen to and believe. And the other part was, I think, the more strategic question. I think, that's hard, because there is a lot of system reform that's required. But this is where that first part I just spoke about needs to flow through to the second part, because that's what people need to demand. It's that change. Change the structure, change the system. Not here, I said politics is not my business, and I'm not here to call out one party over another or one person over another. But if you're not seeing the action that you want, you need to bring that change, or you need to demand that action from the people that are responsible to act. And I think that's what really is going to bring that change. They're there. The advice is given to people. I've written, I can't remember how many strategic plans around solving, first of all, money laundering, and then even a national safety and prosperity plan is one I talked about, in terms of, well, how are we actually going to use agencies like the ICAC, along with all the other partner agencies, to actually deliver this for the people, to let's actually a tangible change. And what tangible changes look like, in the very first sense, it's seizure of cash, which is corrupt money. It's seizure of things like gold. It's seizure of firearms. It's restraint of people's bank accounts. It's taking control and governance over the state-owned enterprises to actually bring that change, and actually seeing that, that revenue is going through to the people and for the growth and development of the country.
Thank you so much, Dan. Dan, thank you so much for joining us on Coffee with Lewa. We deeply appreciate your time, your honesty, and the courage you continue to show in the light and the fight against corruption here in Papua New Guinea. Your work reminds us that accountability and integrity are not abstract ideas. They are the foundation for real change, for safer communities, and a future where our children can believe in good governance. On behalf of our audience, I want to say we honor your service and we stand with you in this important mission. Thank you once again for being here with us, and we wish you and ICAC strength for the journey ahead.
Thank you, Loa, and I'm happy to talk anytime, because I think it's important that people hear the message.
Absolutely. We're looking forward to having you back. Thank you so much. That was Dan Balch, Deputy Commissioner of ICAC Papua New Guinea, sharing powerful insights on the fight against corruption and the hope for a better future. Dan is just one voice, but the fight against corruption is our fight. From the very beginning, our forefathers wanted ICAC to protect integrity, The first legislation was drafted back in 1994. It took us almost 30 years to finally pass it in 2023. But here we are, 50 years after independence, and already the Commission is under threat. If we want to stop corruption, it will not be the politicians who save us. It will be us, the people, demanding better. Corruption is why our hospitals do not have medicine, why our schools are underfunded, why our roads are falling apart, and why our children continue to suffer. Every missing service is money stolen or misused. It took 48 years to build an ICAC, but only months to cripple it. So the question is, what will we demand? A strong ICAC that recovers our money and holds leaders accountable, or silence that lets another 50 years slip away? The ball is in our court, Papua New Guinea. If we want a future that is bright and abundant, we must stand together and demand integrity. Corruption will only end when the people refuse to accept it any longer. To our viewers, it's your turn now. Let's take this conversation to the comments section. Let us know your thoughts. We want to hear from you. If you found this conversation meaningful and you want to see more, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and share with your family and friends to keep the dialogue flowing. We appreciate you and we thank you for being here. We'll see you on the next one, right here on Coffee with Lewa.